afternoon, everybody. We are almost closing Integrate, for this year, of course. But we still have a couple of episodes for Azure on Air to go. With me, I have Martin Abbott.
Hello there.
Coming all the way for a session of half an hour, one podcast, and a lot of socializing.
Absolutely.
And listening to so much brand new content from the Microsoft product group members, but of course also all the MVPs. Yeah, he made the trip all the way from Perth in Western Australia. It's your third time in a row now, or second?
Yeah, second time in a row, but I've done, I think, 5 of these or 6 of these
altogether.
now.
Yeah, altogether. Yeah. I had quite an interesting history. You have been in FVP, also in BizTalk, and then at some moment you moved to Microsoft, left Microsoft, regained your MVP title.
I did, about 4 months ago now, I think.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, yeah, you're right, I remember. Yeah, there was some other conference going on.
Yes.
The summit, it was close to the summit.
It was indeed, Too close to the summit, unfortunately.
A little bit too close, indeed. But well, so be it. Happy to have you.
Thank you.
Welcome
Happy to be here.
To the episode. Yeah, thank you. We're going to talk about Gen AI Copilot.
Yeah.
And, before we move on to the topic, feel free to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hi, Martin Abbott. So, as you said, Lex, I flew for 24 hours to get here. I've got 22 hours to go home. But I love this event, and it's because for me, the event is not just about the integration and all that sort of stuff. It's the networking and catching up with friends, but also the product group. And it's just such a great opportunity to actually hear from the people whose feet are on the ground. So I really love that part of the event. But my background is very much integration based. BizTalk into Azure integration services, and more latterly into things like AI. More generally, of course, you can't really have a conversation with a customer nowadays without talking about AI.
No.
So it's kind of like everywhere, really. So yes, that's kind of where my journey has taken me, and with like little steps into health and various other places as well. So What have you done before BizTalk, actually? So I was still integration. Yeah, so going way back in the mists of ancient time, I was very much in as like an implementation person for financial software and delivery and support and so on and so forth. But pretty much as when I started my my journey in proper Microsoft tech, it was sort of very early on in web. So I did a lot of ASP stuff. And as soon as I moved into ASP.NET and they started revving all that sort of stuff, I immediately moved away from web front end stuff to middle tier and middleware. So I moved very quickly into integration. So that would have been 2000 or something like that.
Probably, yeah.
So
classic ASP, right?
Yeah. So, but I suppose it's not really a claim to fame, but I introduced BizTalk 2000 to one of the big retail stores in the UK, and they became one of the biggest users of it. But we just did a proof of concept with it right there, and it was not really until BizTalk 2004 when the product really stabilized a bit more. Yeah. And that's when they really took off with their usage. So I've been around BizTalk a long time, and I've been away from BizTalk a long time. Yes. So
yeah. That's what Stephen Thomas used to say. Halfway of his career, he has been talking to customers to talk them into BizTalk.
Yeah.
And the other half, he's talking about getting them
get away from
BizTalk, into the cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you already said so. Currently, you're focusing. Is it focusing? At least one of your focus areas is Gen AI Copilot.
Yeah, correct.
Indeed, a very hot topic. Brings you to the table.
It is.
There's just so much that can be said about it. We've seen the demos from ChatGPT 4.0 and that kind of stuff, and even the very first release. Probably that was ChatGPT 3.5 that was already overwhelming, the amount of information and the amount of capabilities that came with it. When did you start your journey in LM and AI?
So my journey, I come from a town, so Perth, which is very heavily into resources, so mining, oil and gas, that kind of thing.
Gold. There's gold.
Gold, lithium. So there's a lot of stuff there, right? And a lot of that kind of industry, like manufacturing, is all about the data that you're picking up from your devices and how you essentially react to that information.
Yeah.
So SCADA systems, that sort of thing. So the biggest problem with it is most of those organizations think they're quite high up a data maturity curve. We know how to do predictive analytics. It's easy. We're getting 75,000 tags from our mine every 2 seconds, right? We know how to deal with that level of data. And then they realize very quickly that big data actually does mean big data. And therefore they don't understand just the simple, basic, rudimentary stuff around machine learning. So they're actually much lower on that maturity curve. Yeah. What I think OpenAI has done, or AI generally, AI now being very, very advanced machine learning models, rather than that image that we saw of all the robots in the movies in the 90s. That were AI. That's not really what AI is currently. That's probably what AGI, artificial general intelligence, will become. But very quickly, those models became more democratized. This is how you typically do predictive analytics. This is how you typically solve these kinds of problems. Very quickly, with ChatGPT in particular, trained on a huge corpus of data so that it understands natural language much more natively, especially when you tell it how you want it to answer through prompts, has kind of like given the opportunity for those kind of organizations to march up that maturity curve a lot more quickly. You have to be cautious, of course, because the one thing you can say about ChatGPT and OpenAI and the services that are built around that is that they're not 100%. They're not going to give you 100% of the answer.
No, yeah.
So, and that's a key thing that you have to remember. And that's what I was trying to get across in my session yesterday, right? So was that your mileage may vary, and so therefore you still need to check you're working.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. That still remains very important, of course.
Of course.
Also we're still, maybe it's also just a kind of process, right? But also we still, as a human being, we still feel superior over software. Yeah. But at least what you can do, you can use your common sense. Is this what ChatGPT gives me? Is this the real truth?
Yeah, and I think the key thing to remember about all these tools, they're co-pilots. They work with you. They don't replace you.
Indeed.
Right. So they're co-pilots. They're not autopilots. So it's an important distinction. So there's a lot of concern in the industries generally about the fact that these things may take our jobs and all that sort of stuff. We're 20 years away from that, right? So probably they never will. There's those machine learning models and automation that you see, particularly on mine sites. There's a great example of that. Trucks that go into the mines, trains that take ore from the mines to the ports. They've been automated, but there's still a human being somewhere either watching it or available to take over if they need to. And OpenAI or the GPT type engines, they're going to be the same as that for the short term, I think, probably the next many years, I expect. Yeah. So they're there to help you. So I think once you overcome that idea that they're not there to take your job and they're there to help you, then you start getting the benefit out of them.
True. Yeah.
But again, cautious is always the thing. I was talking to a few people yesterday in the networking events and saying, we haven't had it yet, but when somebody uses Copilot in Outlook to write an email, and they just happen to, and they're using, say, speech to text to dictate so as it can generate it. Yeah. And they just happen to have a side conversation with somebody, and they just happen to mention in that side conversation to somebody what they think about their boss. And then that email gets sent because they don't then go through and check it. And then all of a sudden, maybe they get fired. Yeah. Who's responsible? Is it the AI? Oh, so there's a whole area around some of these things that as we go forwards, you have to think how that's going to be solved. Do AIs become member of staff? And if they are a member of staff, do they have KPIs? Yeah. How do you manage them? How do you keep them ethical? Yeah. So it's a fascinating area, and Copilot is just touching on the surface of that right now. It's a great time to be in the industry, I think.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. Yeah. Can you tell a little bit more about your session from yesterday? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yesterday I was talking about, so my session was titled Building Integration Solutions Using GitHub Copilot Chat, right? So anybody who is a developer, so GitHub has, I think it's something like 85 million developers use GitHub on a daily basis, something like that. So it's obviously fairly entrenched in the industry. So they created Copilot, which is essentially something that's a coding tool. So it's a predictive tool that can fix code, write tests, tell you what's wrong with your code, fill in code, change code, that kind of thing. and it's trained on all the repos, not all the repos, but repos within GitHub, right? So repos they're allowed access to. That's a key distinction. But of course, what you do in large language models like ChatGPT's GPT 4.0 or the older GPT 3.5 is you train it on a corpus of data and you try and eliminate as much bias as you possibly can. But when you're training on a corpus of data that is inherently biased, so for instance, there's a lot of C# code, there's a lot of Java code, there's less Pascal code, there's even less Fortran code. So if you want to find the answer to something that in Fortran, the level of confidence that you'll get from the response is much lower. So I thought it'd be a nice exercise just to go, okay, what are we going to do? Let's build a really basic scenario and see how far I can get through that scenario by using GitHub Copilot chat to give me the answers. And the outcome of that was, it was okay for some things. Azure Functions is a good example of that. It was very good for that, or it was okay for that. API management policies, it's pretty good at that. Logic apps, it was terrible because Logic apps doesn't lend itself to that because it's a design surface visual, and connections and they're kind of separate. It tries to put everything in one place and it can't create the connections. So it doesn't really work. But it did create a nice list of the things that you needed to do in order to build your Logic app. So at least it gave some functionality there. So there was a few things around that kind of thing that was good. Just as a little exercise, I thought I'd try and do some stuff with the new functionality within inside Event Grid. So Event Grid has now MQTT broker built into it and can support pull as well as push. So I asked it the question. I asked, can I do MQTT with Event Grid? And it came back and said no. Can you do pull semantics with Event Grid? It said no, because of course it's not been trained on that data because that data doesn't exist in the repos just yet because it's brand new functionality. It's been out about 6 months. So it's just one of those exercises. I thought it'd be a really interesting exercise just to see how far you can get through and whether it's, to try and articulate the value. And I think the value for me out of that process was it's a great tool for learning how to do the basic stuff. But any advanced scenarios, you're going to want to have already done that learning.
So it can kind of help with a boilerplate.
100%.
But so of course that saves time. So that improves your productivity.
But 100%.
The real work still just needs to be done.
And scenarios like when you're a new developer and you inherit code. If you inherit code and you don't quite know what it does, then the normal process there is you build it and debug it and put breakpoints and you kind of go, but you can actually just highlight a piece of code and say /explain and it will do its best to explain that code. And it does a pretty good job. It's C# and Java and things like that. It does actually a really good job of telling you what it does.
Yeah, exactly, because much of the GitHub repos
correct
are using those languages.
Correct.
So there's a good amount of data it can be used
100%
to come with good samples.
And you can augment GitHub Copilot with your own stuff as well. So if you buy the enterprise version, you can actually augment it with your own stuff, things like coding standards and stuff like that. So again, from that enterprise scenario, it will have a lot of value in terms of making sure that people are governed in the way they build their code. I thought it would just be an interesting exercise and a fun session. So.
Certainly. No, it is funny indeed, because just like you said, you mentioned some more modern languages like C#, but then also Fortran, what else, Pascal. It's less likely that you will find those there's a lot of code in those repos simply because they are somewhat older
Python,
languages.
Same.
Exactly.
A lot of Python. So, but I did. So the scenario that I started with, just to kind of like do a level set, was about file I/O, because I don't know why it's one of those things that never lands in my mind and stays there, right? So it's always something that I have to remember every single time I do a bit of basic file I/O in C#. And I wrote the C# code using Copilot Chat and said, now rewrite this in assembly, and it does it, and it actually does a pretty good job. I mean, you can't compile it because it's assembly is very specific to the architecture. So you can't compile it or do anything with it. But I thought, well, it looks like it probably does the right thing. So it was fascinating just to try that.
And also I noticed there are good learning resources for it, right? On Learn, you have a new challenge that you can try. You're completely taken by the hand and do all the steps. You need to take a subscription. To GitHub Copilot.
Yes.
But it's a trial version, so you can try it for 1 month for free, and then just get playing. And start creating stuff and see what kind of suggestions that you would get, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and everything prompt based and
I think for me, and I mentioned this, that if you look at, I don't know what an average developer earns in all the jurisdictions around the world. I know roughly what an average developer would earn in Australia. So GitHub Copilot chat is $100 a year. As if you take a private account, so you've got a private account in GitHub. Obviously, it's just a login inside Visual Studio Code, so it doesn't really matter if you use your own account or an enterprise account. Mm-hmm. And you kind of go, well, that's probably 1 or 2 hours of your time. So over the course of a year, will it save you 1 or 2 hours of your time? Yeah, it's very, very likely that it will save you 1 or 2 hours of your time the first time you use it. So it's kind of one of those things. I invested in it as soon as it came out because I just thought, because I don't code every day, so it was pretty important for me to try and get that step up. Just first time that I was getting back into code.
Yeah, and also stuff that I noticed is if you're playing with it in Visual Studio Code, if you have separate tab pages open with samples of your own code, it will use that as a context for the code that needs to be generated. Yeah, based on the prompts that you provide.
Correct, and like all these things, and I tried to reinforce this point as many times as I possibly could about checking you're working and your mileage may vary and all those sorts of things. Because a lot of the value that you get out of them is how you ask the question.
Exactly.
So that whole there's an entire science around prompt engineering. It's called engineering.
It's a new skill, right? That's a new skill.
Exactly. So there was a research paper written that I found very fascinating. I can post you the link at some point, Lex, and we can put it up on the web. But where as integration professionals, we're used to patterns. Sequential convoy, parallel convoy, messaging, message adapters, all those sorts of things. We're used to patterns. This research paper, which was from a university, I think in the US, it was all about standard prompt patterns. Mm-hmm. So when we start talking about multi-shot patterns to train the way you're going to ask questions and that sort of thing, and you start digging into the details of the best way of getting answers, it can get complex quite quickly. So having a patternized approach, when I ask this kind of question of this kind of data, this is the best way to ask those kind of questions.
Exactly.
You just kind of go, this is going to be golden in the future.
Yeah.
There'll be entire university courses, I'm sure. Entire university modules written about prompt engineering. In fact, they probably already are.
Yeah, correct. Correct. Yeah, so that's indeed, that will become very important.
Yeah.
Well, it can already handle multiple lines of, not documentation, but prompts, right?
Yeah. Oh, and look, you can.
So that helps.
So you can give it multiple steps. So and if there was one thing that they always used to say is that it was really, really bad at maths. Right. So GPT 3.5 was terrible at maths. So you could ask it a complex maths question, it would get it wrong most of the time. To be fair, that's probably true of my kids. But I think the key thing there was that if you gave it an example or multiple examples of how to do it, then you could train the behavior so as it got it right.
Indeed.
And we all remember the bot that was put online, which just by, so it was in Twitter. I won't mention what it was or who published it, but anybody would probably know. And people were interacting with this bot, and very quickly this bot became fascist. Because the people who were asking the questions were specifically trying to see how you get the answers back out. And that's one of the problems that we still have now in the systems, is that if you've got a bad actor, they can actually ask questions in such a way that it leaks back out how the model is trained, and then they can start asking questions and exfiltrating your data. So there's a lot of stuff in that space around cyber that's going on to make sure that you can't do that.
But that's also one of the biggest concerns, right? The ethics around it. And
ethical AI. There's a huge amount of stuff around that, and there's a lot of so OpenAI as it stands has a bunch of ethical background to it, and you can turn that ethical filter off if you really want to. You probably shouldn't, but if you look at some of the scenarios that have happened in the wild, you can understand why these things are there. And you want to make sure that you're not creating a scenario where bad actors can train your bot through, say you've got a public chatbot that's got OpenAI at the back end, train your bot to be providing responses that are unethical. So you need to make sure that you cover all those bases. So again, it's a fascinating topic.
It is. Yeah. Are you using yourself in actual project at the moment?
Yeah, so I've done a few things around retrieval augmented generation, so RAG, which is all about training things on your own data, vectorizing your data, embeddings, there's chat completions, all those sorts of things. They're all techniques that are good for checking your own data or your own information. So that's one area that there's a lot of things as well. Because that sort of thing, just simple things you can imagine, like if you're doing things like, and I was talking again to somebody earlier on around, say you're onboarding new staff, right? Everybody goes through that process when they start in big enterprises. Big enterprises have a bunch of policies, IT policy, clothing policy, whatever they are, right? Wouldn't it be great if you can just get them to ask the questions? What's the clothing policy? Well, it's this, and I've got that from this piece of information.
Should be part of the data.
Yeah, absolutely. Or can you build me an onboarding presentation in PowerPoint? With a bunch of steps. It doesn't build the PPTX, but it can tell you the content of the slides that use the policies as I get those people onboarded in the most efficient way. Yeah. And the way you ask that question depends on what you get. Yeah. So just simple things like that means you don't have to continually think about how you build that content. Yeah. So that's where that productivity comes in, right? It's really about that productivity and making sure you're doing things efficiently.
Yeah, true. Yeah. We're reaching the end of the podcast. Do you have any, maybe final thoughts, maybe any fun experience, anything that impressed you?
So I think for me, the key thing that I've found, and ChatGPT, the free version of ChatGPT is good for a lot of things. It's not so good for other things. For completions and stuff like that, it's not so good. But there's certainly a lot of stuff that we encounter day to day. Right, every single one of us encounters things that we think we have to give some more processing cycles than we probably should. So why not ask something that can at least give us 50% or 80% of the answer? So for me, I think it's about, and I had a question recently at work around the best way of writing a logical design document. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, I could sit down and think about that for a few hours. Write a few points and hand that to somebody, or I can go into OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, type in what's the best content for a logical design document, and it came back with a bunch of information. I looked at it, and I validated that it was mostly right. Yeah, and it took me 5 minutes.
That's the whole thing,
right? So it's productivity. So for me, I think the key takeaway for me is use the copilots because they're there for a reason, right? So they're there to make you more productive. They are copilots, not autopilots. They won't do your work. So always make sure you check your work. But absolutely dive in and use them. Because if you're not going to do the more advanced stuff around, on your own data and so on and so forth, just even things like Bing Chat, right? So the chat or the copilot, Bing Copilot, the copilot that's within Bing now, it's just amazing at providing answers. Just across the internet with the internet data that exists on the internet. So it's just really the evolution of these things has grown very, very quickly. And they're actually much more accurate now than they used to be. So use them. That's my takeaway. Use the tools because they're good.
True. No, that's also what I see myself, right? I started when I need to find some information. I'm moving more and more to ChatGPT than Google. Because you immediately get your answer.
And it references as well, right?
Exactly.
So you know where it's got the data from.
Exactly.
So that allows you to then validate whether you trust that source.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So there's that validation process that they provide as well.
And
of course those tools have been outbuilt into Word and Outlook and Excel and all the others as well, right? So there's a lot of availability of that tooling. I mean, obviously there's a cost to that, but there's a lot of availability of that tooling in the tools that we use every day. So if that means that when I'm sending an email around a sales process to somebody based on my sales process that I've stored in some document somewhere, I can just go and write that inside my Outlook email and it generates the content and I can validate it and hit send. Why would I not do that?
Of course. It's just being efficient, right?
100%. We want to spend our time doing the things that we love and enjoy, right? There's been a meme going around the internet right now about I don't want AI to do art and writing. I want AI to do my laundry and cleaning. I want to do my art and writing. And it's very true to a degree, but those two things, laundry and cleaning, require a human interaction because there's a physical aspect to them. But if I can get my AI to do the things like write my emails, so as I only have to validate them, summarize a meeting that I've just taken on Teams, which all that sort of stuff now exists, so as I don't have to do that, it gives me actually more time back to do the things in work that I can be more efficient and enjoy more anyway.
Still in the last one that you mentioned, taking meeting notes.
Yeah.
Well, I think there still needs to be improved a little bit.
Yeah, it does. Sometimes. It does. It's like all these things. And transcription is the same.
Makes sense.
And transcription is the same.
Yeah.
Transcription.
Correct.
Transcription can only understand based on what it hears.
What it can understand. Yeah.
Right. So if you've got a heavy accent, or if you've got there's noise in the room and it can't hear, then there's a lot of things that are around that sort of stuff.
What kind of jargon?
Yeah, and you see this all the time on videos that have been transcribed, where you read it and you're trying to read along, and you're kind of going, that's not what they said.
What doesn't make sense?
Because our ears hear things and interpret differently to an AI.
Yeah. But it's a process. It will get there. It will get there.
Yeah, of course it will. Yeah. It's all about the training.
Correct. Okay. Well, it has been great talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very interesting topic. That's for
it
sure. And we're only scratching the surface, right? I mean, we're only at the beginning of this very journey with AI. So there's so much more to come. So
if you think ChatGPT 3.5 was out, I think 19 months ago, 20 months ago, something like that, first time.
Yeah.
And where we are now.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, already.
Fun times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There was around a bit more than a year between 3.5 and 4.0, something like that. So
correct.
Yeah. So that's very promising. Very promising. Yeah.
It's an exciting time, I think.
True. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again. Thanks for being in the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Very well. And our audience. This was my last podcast for here at Integrate. We'll have Mike with another one, and so anyway, we hope to meet you in the next one. Thank you, everybody.